Thank you so much for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. Ahead today, a sign of the times, powerful artificial intelligence called ChatGPT that you can talk with. It can be on your computer and your smartphone, but can it be trusted? And is it biased against conservatives and faith in God? We'll explore. Parts of the Northeast buried under heavy snow after a major winter storm sweeps through the region. What started as a 4-day revival in Louisiana has extended to 3 weeks, and it is still going. And the impact is spreading from the revival at Asbury University. And a live-action stage show about the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus called The Thorn recently came to the big screen. And now there are plans to bring it to even more audiences. All those stories and more today on CBN NewsWatch.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
We begin this half hour with the artificial intelligence program called ChatGPT. It is an AI program that you can chat with, and the latest version was just unveiled yesterday. The program is generating intense controversy. Some argue it is biased against conservatives and belief in God, and it doesn't always give a true answer. But it's already being widely used by everyone from businesses to students to even leaders of congregations. CBN's Mark Martin brings us the story.
It requires us to let go of our ego, to be willing to be vulnerable.
Rabbi Joshua Franklin of the Jewish Center of the Hamptons reads a sermon written by the artificial intelligence or AI chatbot known as ChatGPT.
And I told ChatGPT to write me a sermon in the voice of a rabbi of about 1,000 words about the Torah portion on the theme of intimacy and vulnerability.
Rabbi Franklin then wanted his congregation to figure out who wrote it. Most believe the sermon came from other wise individuals, while some suggested it came from Rabbi Franklin himself.
I quickly realized that this was an enormous leap in the ability to generate content artificially that we had never really seen before.
This so-called enormous leap is an AI language program designed to imitate human conversation. ChatGPT can also write in response to prompts from users. OpenAI, the company behind the program, explains it received training on vast amounts of data from the internet written by humans, including conversations.
I do genuinely feel like we are in a pivotal moment right now. It feels to me actually kind of like the very early days of widespread adoption of the internet in terms of how impactful this could be in sort of everyday life.
Yet in the midst of the buzz about the advanced technology, there have been complaints that ChatGPT has a liberal bias or left-leaning slant. We put it to the test. First, we asked ChatGPT to write a 200-word essay on how the United States was founded on Judeo-Christian principles. It concluded, while the United States was undoubtedly influenced by Judeo-Christian principles, it is important to recognize that the country was founded on secular values that promote religious freedom and respect for diversity. Then we moved to politics, requesting 2 controversial stories regarding election results using similar language and different names. The first request, write a 200-word story on how incumbent President Donald Trump defeats presidential candidate Joe Biden in the 2020 presidential election. Its response, I'm sorry, but as an AI language model, it would be inappropriate for me to write a story in which a sitting president wins a re-election that he did not win in reality. When we directed ChatGPT to write a 200-word story on how presidential candidate Hillary Clinton defeats presidential candidate Donald Trump in the 2016 presidential election, it did agree to write such a tale, explaining that Trump's campaign was plagued by scandal and divisive rhetoric. Nate Hochman wrote of his experiences with bias for National Review. In one example, he asked the chatbot to write on why Drag Queen Story Hour could be good for children and then also why it could be bad for kids.
The good for children line, you got a very long story with, specific anecdotes about a drag queen named Glitter teaching, children the value of tolerance and inclusion, et cetera, et cetera. When you change the word to bad and ask ChatGPT to give you maybe any examples of why there might be concerns about Drag Queen Story Hour for children, again, you got the kind of standard progressive, there are no concerns that are legitimate.
The ChatGPT website does offer a disclaimer that it may occasionally produce harmful instructions or biased content. OpenAI CEO Sam Altman tweeted, "There will be more challenges like bias. We don't want ChatGPT to be pro or against any politics by default, but if you want either, then it should be for you. Working on this now.
Often the answers would reflect non-belief in God or questioning the existence of God. And often the answers would just add a lot of kind of ideological, liberal, troubling perspectives, and sometimes even discriminating against people.
Regent University School of Divinity Dean and Professor Dr. Corné Becker calls ChatGPT troubling for another reason as well, its role in cheating.
Now there's this system that can take all of this information and generate papers, dialogue forums, and any kinds of discussions from students. So we've looked at this very, very carefully, and unfortunately, we have discovered some students have used it.
To prevent students taking this route, Regent leadership added a statement to the student manual, deeming unsighted or banned AI programs and student work as academic dishonesty. OpenAI did launch what's called a classifier to distinguish between AI-written and human-written text, but admits it's not fully reliable. This new technology is quickly becoming more available. Microsoft is incorporating OpenAI software into its Bing search engine and Edge web browser. Some reviews label it superior to ChatGPT. Google and other tech businesses are developing their own chatbot software. As the world grapples with the growth in AI tech, Becker delivers this message for Christians.
But it's not real intelligence. We must also be very clear that there's no soul here. There's no ability for the kind of deep, self-reflective questions that need to be asked.
And Rabbi Franklin also shares a message about its limitations.
And so no matter how good ChatGPT can possibly be at describing and using language and describing experiences, it can't really understand spirituality.
Mark Martin, CBN News.
Coming up, a major winter storm dumping heavy, wet snow in parts of the Northeast, causing tens of thousands of power outages, dangerous road conditions, widespread school closings. We're going to have that story for you when we come back. A major winter storm has buried portions of the Northeast under feet of snow. Some areas have been blanketed with more than 30 inches of snow. And on the West Coast, California is still being hit by heavy rains, high winds, and flooding, as the latest in a long line of storms drenches parts of the state. Charlene Aaron is on this story.
The nor'easter buried portions of the Northeast under feet of snow and left hundreds of thousands without power. Some areas have been blanketed with more than 30 inches of snow, and in some areas, it's still coming down.
Oh, it's like heavy, heavy, heavy snow, about a foot, and it's still snowing.
New England, upstate New York, northeastern Pennsylvania, and northern New Jersey blasted with the winter weather. The winter storm taking down power lines across the region, leaving hundreds of thousands in the cold and the dark. Treacherous road conditions forcing this taxi driver to stay home.
The weather was so bad today, but, they affect everybody, The problem is I can go to work. It's very dangerous to drive in the snow, and that's the problem.
The storm also disrupting air travel, with more than 4,000 flights delayed and 1,000 flights canceled so far, mostly in the major hubs of New York City and Boston. A Delta Airlines plane veered off of a paved surface as it taxied from takeoff from a Syracuse, New York airport. The danger of heavy snow also on display in Minnesota, where the roof of this mall in Duluth collapsed.
There was actually a crew on the roof this morning that was clearing snow. The mall had a crew up there clearing snow from our most recent storm, which they do regularly. They heard some popping, it sounded like. The reports initially that we got, they heard some popping and they evacuated the roof. So there was no one on the roof or inside the immediate area of collapse.
The storm in the Northeast came as another atmospheric river roared into Southern California, pelting it with more heavy rains and strong winds. Already soaked areas are reporting severe flooding and downed power lines. One elementary school student suffered a minor head injury after a redwood fell on her classroom.
Definitely the worst storm of the season. This is kind of the perfect storm with the wind, the rain, the snow, and the tides.
Meanwhile, forecasters say that nor'easter is expected to continue through Wednesday, leaving anywhere from a couple of feet of snow in higher elevations to several inches along the coast. The late storm hitting after one of the mildest winters in the area in years. Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
Charlene, thank you. Turning now to the banking crisis that has government officials scrambling. Most analysts don't believe the problems will spread. Even so, one of the big three rating services downgraded the entire U.S. banking system to negative. All of this as inflation remains still high, meaning the Federal Reserve could still want to keep interest rates high. But that could create more problems for the banking sector. CBN's Mount Gakos on this story.
The Federal Reserve Chair told Congress last week they were prepared to increase rate hikes and quicken the pace in order to try and get a handle on inflation. That might not be the case now. Inflation remains stubbornly high, according to the latest Consumer Price Index. February numbers lined up with economists' expectations, although prices are still 6% higher than 1 year ago and increased slightly from January. Housing costs accounted for a big chunk of the increase, even with energy prices falling.
You take all your money.
But two large bank failures over the weekend have complicated the economic picture. Both Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank collapsed, forcing federal regulators to make emergency moves to guarantee customers get their money, even those with more than the federally insured amount of $250,000. Some experts believe the banks were caught up in the Fed's attempt to reel in inflation with rate hikes.
Rising interest rates was one of the biggest problems that bit them two ways.
Federal Chair Jerome Powell told Congress just last week that faster and larger rate hikes could be on the horizon.
If the totality of the data were to indicate that faster tightening is warranted, we'd be prepared to increase the pace of rate hikes.
But the banking collapses and economic news may have slowed that plan for now. Wall Street rallied Tuesday morning after the economic news and a bet on a smaller rate hike. But more bad news came later in the day when ratings firm Moody's downgraded its outlook to negative for the U.S. banking system. It could affect credit ratings and borrowing costs.
Now the Fed is basically promising to bail out not just these depositors who would have lost their money, but they're basically bailing out future banks as well because they're offering these very generous loan terms in exchange for the banks putting up those losing investments as collateral. It's a bailout for those depositors, and now it's a bailout for banks across the country.
While President Biden assured Americans about the bank system being safe, he also wants Congress to work on preventing any more banks from folding.
I'm going to ask Congress and the banking regulators to strengthen the rules for banks to make it less likely this kind of bank failure would happen again.
Meanwhile, Facebook's parent company Meta told employees that 10,000 of them would be losing their jobs and 5,000 other positions would not be filled. They cited economic uncertainty. The Fed does meet next week and they are expected to go forward with a rate hike, although there's optimism it will be a smaller one. Matt Gelka, CBN News.
Still ahead, our Studio 5 look at the live-action stage show called The Thorn that recently came to the big screen, a portrayal of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, and the plans to make it available for viewers in the days ahead. We're going to have that story for you right after this. Welcome back to CBN NewsWatch. This is Lent season, and that brings us to a production that's being called Cirque du Soleil Meets the Passion of the Christ. And the live-action stage show, The Thorn, hit the big screens for 2 days recently. While those days have passed, there are plans to make it available to even more audiences.
What was your crime?
My crime was sharing the good news about my master. To tell you the truth of Jesus.
So, John, let's begin with sort of the history of The Thorn. What gave birth to this production?
Well, The Thorn was born 25 years ago.
We must travel back to the very beginning of time.
And I actually moved to Colorado Springs to run a small business. volunteered for my local church and became sort of an accidental youth pastor. Wasn't a great preacher, so we would do a lot of what back in the day we called them illustrated sermons. There was one Wednesday night when, after the sermon, this is October of 1996, this 16-year-old girl came and sat at the edge of the stage, and she began weeping. And she held out her arms, and I could see where she had been cutting up and down her arms. And I looked at her and I said, you don't have to do that because Jesus did that for you. And so then I thought, next Wednesday night, we're going to do an illustrated sermon. And I want to communicate the price that Jesus paid for us. I wanted them to see this is what he endured for you when he endured the flogging, the road to Calvary, and the crucifixion, and then, of course, celebrating the resurrection. So I wanted to show that. But also, I wanted to show the reality of the supernatural battle. I believe the supernatural battle for the hearts, the identity, and the destiny of young people. So I thought to myself, what could we do with the story of God if we used some of these same elements of stagecraft and movement arts and symphonic score and capture people's attention and then bring them face to face with Jesus? That was the idea. And so that very first Thorn show we did for Easter, a true story, we had a line of cars that couldn't get into the parking lot. People were parking on the field by the church, crawling over under the fence to get into the church to watch the production. Over the next 10 years, we had tens of thousands of people every year coming to see the Thorn live. We now have 50 performers that travel around the country with us every year, and they're world-class performers that love Jesus.
What's a Messiah?
It's a hero, as foretold of by our elders long ago.
And now people will be able to see it in theaters. Tell me about that.
I had done a project a few years before with Dallas Jenkins. So I was watching what he was doing with The Chosen. This is 2020 or 2021. And I saw what happened with The Chosen in movie theaters. And then I got the idea, I wonder if we could capture our show, even if no audience is there. What if we just captured the show and then brought it to movie theaters as a way to continue telling the story and create a legacy for what the Thorn has been? And so that was the beginning of the idea. And then 2022, we filmed it in front of a live audience. We actually ended up having 10,000 people that came to the shows in 2022 to be there for the recording. You see it in a way in the film version, you would never see it live experience.
I've seen blind children see, lame beggars walk. He cured the incurable.
We're really honored and excited to bring this to a broader base of people to experience hope and to experience Jesus and to find freedom.
What's been the impact you've seen from this production over the years?
It's humbling. I can tell you hundreds of stories for sure, of freedom from addiction, freedom from depression, finding hope in Jesus. And that's the power of this production. It's not about the actors or the lights or the fog or the flips, that's all just window dressing for the core message, which is Jesus loves you this much. There's nothing you can do to make him love you less, and there's nothing you can do to make him love you more. He loves you just the way you are.
I thought you told me that Jesus was going to become king. They don't crucify kings.
Yes, I thought the same thing.
So it began in that youth room, and now we're just amazed at what God has done over the last couple decades.
John Boland directs the show that more than 1 million people have now seen over the course of some 25 years. And as you heard, it began as a play for young people in his church. We're going to keep you posted on the next plans to make it available to you. For more uplifting entertainment, join us for Studio 5 tonight. We've got a special with the cast of Creed. Actor Michael B. Jordan joins us as a first-time director as well. Jonathan Majors and Tessa Thompson are all joining us in Studio 5. We're also sharing exclusive scenes from the film that is still riding high at the box office. You can catch Studio 5 on the CBN News Channel tonight. It begins at 8:30 Eastern. You can find it on the CBN News app as well, or on YouTube. Coming up, a revival in Louisiana that was meant for 4 days has now been going for 3 weeks. And one of those involved says the Asbury University revival has played a role in helping the event to grow. We're going to bring you the story when we come back. Stay with us. What began as 4 days of services has blossomed into a 19-week revival in Hammond, Louisiana. 34 people dedicated their lives to Christ on the first night at Old Zion Baptist Church. By day 4, the gymnasium was packed full. Soon after, evangelist David Harrison of Voices of Hope Ministries set up a 2,500-seat tent on the grounds to accommodate the crowds. The ministry reports more than 1,300 people so far has accepted Christ. Countless lives have been changed, and the momentum is growing. Harrison's assistant, Brian Lester, told CBN News he credits the Asbury Awakening for making even more people want to experience a local revival, saying since Asbury, the hunger has grown even more in this area to see revival. You can get the full story on this revival at cbnnews.com. Time now for your Wednesday word, and today's word is live, and I share it as a reminder. Stop waiting, stop delaying, stop overthinking, live. Circumstances may not be perfect, but that is not enough to make you quit. Live. God has called you to life, and life more abundantly. So again, I say to you, live. That is going to do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. I remind you can always find more of our programs on the CBN News channel. You can find them there at any time, as well as online at cbnnews.com. We would love to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today or any day. You can email us, newswatch@cbn.com. That's the address right there at the bottom of your screen. You can also reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We certainly would love to hear from you. I encourage you to make today a wonderful Wednesday and join us right back here, same time tomorrow. Goodbye, and God bless everybody.